Okay, and welcome to the Week 1 video lecture for Math 119. We're going to do a quick overview of algebra and then cover some Lab 1 centric things as well as a Blackboard tutorial as well. Okay, so first, what is algebra? Algebra is essentially just the manipulation of numbers. To be a little bit more abstract, it's actually the manipulation of symbols. Now, if you want to get really technical and highbrow about things, you can say it's a manipulation of functions, and you can probably see a pattern here. We can keep going and going, but that's not really what I want to talk about today. In fact, algebra comes in 3 stages for most people's lives. First up is grade school algebra. Here we learn the basics of numbers like addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, the order of operations, usually called PEMDAS, and also how to solve equations for a variable, an unknown called x. Later on comes high school algebra. Here we learn a different operation, exponentiation. We also learn how to graph equations, lines, parabolas, things like that. We learn how to work with more variables, not just that regular x, and we also learn how to solve harder equations. Finally, for most people, is college algebra. Here we deal with even more complex functions like logarithms and trig functions, which we'll see later. Graphing even harder equations, sometimes even graphing of 3 dimensions, and still solving equations for x. And as we saw in Lab 0 a little bit, Mathematica can do a lot of this stuff automatically. We already know that it can do basic operations for us. In the Lab 1 today, we'll see that it can graph for us. It can also solve equations for us. And as the semester goes on, we'll realize that there's so much that Mathematica is actually capable of doing for us. Now, for this week's lab, what I'd like to do is talk about a couple of things I think are really important about labs in general, and then I also want to show you how to use the discussion board effectively on Blackboard, including how to submit your labs there so that other students can take a look. Okay, so let's get started. Here's a somewhat completed lab that I've started. This is Lab 1. And I just want to stress again that every gray box you encounter, you should at the very least, be hitting enter. Even if I've already filled in the work for you, you should still be hitting enter on those gray boxes. You should be reading along with the lab, and as you go, hitting enter whenever you see a gray box. Don't just jump through and hit enter on the gray boxes, because all the answers to the questions at the bottom are contained somewhere within the top. So it's important that you actually work through the lab itself and not just skip to the bottom. Again, in every lab at the bottom, there will be closing questions. And I just want to stress a couple of things, especially about this lab. If you're ever doing a closing question and you don't get the output you expect, so for example, in this question, I actually should be getting a picture, and I'm not getting that picture. In fact, what I'm doing is getting an error. And even though the error itself is kind of cryptic and is maybe not very helpful, it's at least letting you know that something's wrong. So you should either be using the Mathematica help, F1 or the actual help menu, or you should be looking at the example that I did with the region plot, in this case, above. Jumping down a little bit here, skipping a few questions. Again, I haven't filled these in just to keep things simple. I want to go to another question here where I've given a couple of links to the help in Mathematica, specific links to specific topics. What you don't want to do for a question like this is just copy an example right out of the help. Here's an example I copied right out of the help. I would not be getting credit for that. It should be an example that I've made up myself, not one that I've copied from somewhere else. A little bit further down, I've given you code to do a somewhat complex problem, and in the next question, I ask you to use that code and change it a little bit. I give you hints as to how to change it, but what you want to do at the beginning is first copy my old code and adjust it as necessary. And here, of course, again, a little bit more of the same. Don't just copy things straight out of the help. Alright, now jumping over to Blackboard for a second, let me show you, again, here's the Week 1 tab for Blackboard. We have the text introduction, we have the video for this week, a little bit further down is the actual lab file, and then at the bottom, just like every week, is the discussion board. And we're going to go there now and just take a look at a few things. Here I've posted 3 example posts, a poor, a mediocre, and a well-written post, and I want to go through each of them with you. Let's start with the poor post. This is a post that would receive a 0 out of 2 for their grade, and it's kind of obvious why. There's misspellings, there's capitalization errors, there's no clear question. This is spam. If you got this in your email, you would delete it. And as a result, because it adds nothing to the discussion, the person who posted this would be getting a 0 out of 2 on that discussion post. Going back, we can now jump to the next one, the mediocre post. This would be a 1 out of 2. Here the users actually asked a question that's pertinent. This does belong in this board, but they haven't really made it clear exactly what the question is, and they haven't told us what they've tried themselves. 2 very important points. That's a 1 out of 2. And finally, we go back here, we can take a look at a well-written discussion post. And here, the user's asking a specific question. So they've written a little bit of introduction, and then they ask a specific question that they're having trouble with. I can't emphasize that enough. After that, they also tell us what they've done themselves. They didn't just come here and ask the question right away. They tried to answer it themselves first. They couldn't, and they went to the discussion board for help. Lower here we see a well-written reply. This would be a reply that also gets a 2 out of 2 because they're answering that specific question that was asked in the original post. Even if you don't know the answer, if you try your best to answer that specific question, you're still going to get perfect credit on that discussion post. Now let's talk about having a lab that you haven't finished yet and you want to ask somebody for help. So we go up to the Create Thread button up here. This lets us create a new post in the discussion board. And we're going to give it some kind of helpful name saying that we need help with a lab. So I'm going to zoom in here just for a second. I'm going to write a subject just so that when people see it, they get an idea of what the post is about. And then what we're going to do is we're going to write a well-written discussion post, and at the end I'm going to show you how to attach it. While I write, though, I'm going to put the mute button on for a second.
Is it all the same vein of insane as drinking from a poison well? And I need new skin for this old skeleton of mine. 'Cause this one that I'm in's let me down once again over time. And I need new skin.
Okay, now let's look at how to attach a file. We go up to this link button. It looks like a paperclip. We click on that, and that's going to open up the Attach File menu. The Attach File menu works just like the lab submission does. We hit Browse My Computer. We find the location of the lab that we want to attach here, we want to get help with. For me, it ends up being right there. It has my name in it. That's how I know that I've at least partially completed it. A couple of options come up here. Usually it's okay to just leave those exactly the way they are, the defaults. If you want to mess around with them, you can, but generally all you gotta do is hit the submit button. That will actually attach the lab to the discussion post. You can see the link right there. And now you can actually hit the submit button on the discussion post so that other students and even myself can read it, and we'll see the post right there. So now if a well-intentioned student comes along and can actually help you, they click on that link, they see your post, they say, oh, I actually was doing pretty well in this lab, I think I can help this student, and they open it up just the same way they would open a lab. They go to Save Link As, and they save it. Note that posting like this and helping other students is an easy way to get a great discussion grade.